Hi, everybody. Today we have Robin Wauters. He's the founding editor at Tech.eu and has an amazing experience of working with platforms like TechCrunch, the Next Web. And I'm pretty sure most of us are familiar with all these platforms because these have been our go-to to look at, European startup trends, VCs, anything related to startups in general. And this is the human right there in the little screen, but the man behind all of this. So thank you so much, Robin, for joining me on the series. And it's been a pleasure. I was just talking to you right before we started recording that it was a long shot. I just shooted a LinkedIn message and I'm so glad that you're here with me. So thank you so much for this.
No, it's absolutely my pleasure. It's great to be invited.
So I think we can start off with right from the early age because you started off your experience with media as a journalist and also a writer. So I want to go back to that in terms of your experience and how did you find out about your passion in media? Was it something that you discovered early on in life, or was it something that you tried and was like, this clicks?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's actually it's not 100% accurate because I started actually working in marketing, which is what I studied as well.
Nice.
At university, in college, and I basically started working in marketing for a tech company, which was sort of a coincidence because that wasn't really my goal, but it did get me interested in sort of the technology space. And I remember when I got an interest in sort of the new generation of entrepreneurs coming out of Silicon Valley, but also in Europe. This whole Web 2.0 generation. I don't know why, but I felt the need to start blogging about it, and I did. So I was sort of one of the early, I guess, bloggers, yes. Especially one of the few bloggers that sort of turned into a profession. And I very, very quickly got picked up by the Next Web and TechCrunch. So as you mentioned in the beginning.
Awesome. But then how was it for you, like even starting it professionally as a blog? Because again, I feel like since we didn't have too many inspirations at that time, turning it as a full-time career was also something that wasn't really people didn't really do that at that time. But then how were you able to do that?
Yeah, in 2022, it's kind of weird to say that, but I always felt that there was a huge difference between sort of professional journalists and bloggers. But it was platforms like TechCrunch that sort of started blurring those lines because there was lots of really high quality reporting going on from day one, very sort of inside knowledge, scoops, etc. Just like a decent amount of knowledge in a certain niche or a certain vertical that would enable people like myself to sort of specialize and really go up against like established journalists, which I didn't even know was possible when I started blogging, but turned out to be sort of something that I was good at. And I was also just incredibly interested in sort of these new business models, this new generation of entrepreneurs, this whole new economy on the internet. The internet wasn't new, but the models that sort of came out of that period of time were very interesting to me.
Awesome. And can you also share more about your experiences working with TechCrunch and the Next Web?
Yeah, for sure. So at TechCrunch, I spent about 4.5 years as a reporter working for the US side from Europe, which is sort of a non-obvious thing to do, but it's because of the time zone, so we could always get to stories earlier than the American journalists. And it was just it was a very, very intense time. I remember working easily 10, 12-hour days.
Wow.
And it would never stop just because the news never stops, right? It was very, very focused on news, and the news would never stop. So it's very intense. It was very, very exhausting, I would say. But it's the best crash course in entrepreneurship you could possibly get, for the simple reason that it's pattern recognition, right? If you write about one startup, you don't really know what startups are. If you write about 10,000 startups, at some point you're going to have some knowledge about, okay, this is what they do, this is the field they operate in, this is sort of the competitive landscape, this is the model, I've seen it before. So you do get educated as you write about what startups are like and what the VC space is like.
Right. That is so interesting. Like, would you mind sharing like maybe the top learnings that you've had in terms of what actually works as a startup and as a team behind it? Because I mean, from what I gather, there's so many things that make up a startup, right? And the founding team is essentially the core part of it. So how do you think, like, what actually works in the startup? Because there might be so many people who are watching this later on who want to start up. And
Yeah, I think you nailed it in your question. It's the founders are the most important thing. It's simply because if you look at the trajectory of an early stage startup that makes it to sort of Series B level, that amount of time, so much comes down to not just the quality of the founders and the quality of the team, but also how they relate to one another and if they're aligned and if they sort of have the same strategy and they're all in and they go for the same thing, that is already a huge plus, right? And then if you have a big market and a good product, blah blah blah, that sort of comes after. But product market fit, actually being able to make money, it's important, and it's very important even in the beginning to at least think about sort of what this could lead to. But it's sort of that dynamic between the founders that's always changing because of the circumstances change. You know, once you get traction, once you face difficulties, once you raise investment, once you start talking to potential acquirers, there might be a misalignment between the founders, and that's when I often see the first signs of a startup's failing, or at least not performing as well as it should. It's that founder relationship. So that needs to be very strong from the beginning.
Right. And also, like, I really wanted to jump more into the Tech.eu sort of experience, which is your, startup that you co-founded. And I really wanted to understand more about how that journey was in terms of, writing for another platform and then starting off your own. I can understand it's a complete shift. So, the struggles that went with it, the learnings that you've had, and also the wins. Like, feel free to share.
Sure. So first of all, I don't consider it a startup because a media company, almost per definition, doesn't really scale all that well or easily. But yeah, it was an interesting journey because I was at TechCrunch for a couple of years, and then I was the European editor for the Next Web. And at those two publications, I could kind of see that there was a little bit of interest in what European tech was doing as a whole, but not a lot, and not enough, at least according to my standards, because I could see sort of the quality of the entrepreneurs and the products and the services that were being built in Europe weren't really being covered by the media in general in a way that I thought was possible. So it was basically to scratch my own itch that I was thinking, there should be like a pan-European publication highlighting the quality of the European tech entrepreneurs and investors, but also not just the good part, but also sort of the struggles, but maybe have sort of one what do you call, like a one-stop shop for information about the European tech space. That was the initial goal, and it was meant to be only a media company, like a professional blog, but it very quickly turned into sort of a repository of information and funding data. So we have a lot of data that we do on the funding, the exits, the IPOs, the specs, etc., that we were very, very much keeping in a proprietary database from day one. And now that helps us, of course, to cover that industry, but also to predict trends, to make reports, to turn it into events or to support existing events with that kind of data. So it's basically a media / market intelligence company now, I would say.
Nice. Okay, that's really exciting. But can you also tell me more about like how exactly, like I can imagine it's an 8-year journey and you've also been acquired, which we can get to in a bit. But I really want to understand, like, let's say if you were to compare the first 4 years with the last 4 years, what were the challenges and what were the learnings, and how could you compare those two sort of eras?
It's been almost 9 years. But interestingly, the first few years were very much learning experience because I'd been a blogger before, a professional working for some of the biggest platforms, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you know how to create a company, right? So I raised a little bit of funding very early on. I had really good co-founders, so that helped me sort of at least buy me 2 years to figure things out. The commercial front, I was very lucky to find very talented people early on to help me guide through that period. And of course, the European tech ecosystem 9 years ago when we started it was still very small. It was interesting and it was growing, but it was still very small. So we sort of grew along with the ecosystem. But if that never happened, if that ecosystem would have stayed the same size, we would have never made it, right? So we were sort of lucky in terms of timing. I think the timing was right. There were only like a few publications, very local, covering startups. So I think it was just the right time, right place to do something like this.
Wow. And what was your biggest challenge in terms of starting Tech.eu?
That's a good question. Sort of figuring out the balance between all of the editorial work and the commercial side of things, because you need to turn that into a viable business, of course. But yeah, it's been an interesting journey, and the last 4 or 5 years have been different because the ecosystem grew. We sort of knew what we wanted to do. It was just a matter of finding the right people, really trying to grow alongside the ecosystem, which we managed to do.
Awesome. And that 8-year journey ended up with an acquisition. Do you want to maybe like talk more about that as well? Because I think it's in really, really exciting news. Again, coming from a media company or a market intelligence company that is not really a startup like you've mentioned already, but then does come around with, let's say, a little bit of funding in the beginning and now gets acquired by another media giant. So I would really want to understand, how that happened.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing to understand is the timing of it, because it was just after sort of the worst of Corona, that year and a half, almost 2 years of Corona that we all went through.
Yep.
In terms of lockdowns, which means not only did the business it didn't get hit in big time, but there was a slowdown for sure in the ecosystem, but also for us. There was fewer opportunities to go out and meet people in person, obviously, because we couldn't really travel. There weren't any events. It forced me and the other people on the team to sort of think, what do we want this business to be in the future? How can we also arm ourselves so something like this happens again, that we're better prepared for it? And we kept on sort of, running into walls as well, because we're not a startup, and every time business is going well and you have a surplus, what do you spend it on? And for me, it was always I have to choose between a designer or a developer or a salesperson or a new journalist. And getting acquired by a bigger media company, as you mentioned, Wauters out of Turkey, sort of removed all those barriers. Then suddenly you have a designer and a developer and a salesperson that you can rely on. So that was a big gift for us. It seemed like the best way forward for the company, also for myself and the team. So yeah, we went to the negotiating table and took a few months, and then we ended up getting acquired, which was last year in October. We announced.
Congratulations on that. But I also want to understand, like, what's the dynamics within like working in an acquired company? Because again, it's very different from having your own and then moving into something that let's merge with another company. So I just want to understand, like, how is that for you right now?
It's a great question to ask, because I always look at these acquisitions sort of from a journalist perspective, right?
Yeah.
And I know some go very well. A lot of them go so-so.
Yep.
Most of them, I would say. And then there's a small group where it really goes very badly. I would say we're very definitely in the first part, we're in terms of a good acquisition, but that's also because we were very, very complementary size-wise. They were bigger than us, but not that much bigger. The founder, Arda, I've known for a long time, more than a decade. And he's also quite well aligned with me. He's almost like, he thinks about business the same way I do, which I already knew. The teams are well aligned. They operate in Turkey. They dominate the landscape over there, but they didn't have any presence in Europe. So it's not like you have to sort of cannibalize or choose between. You just sort of add a layer on top, and then you keep the same structure and you go for a bigger market. So it's sort of an easy constellation, I would say, to do an acquisition in.
Wow. I want to really know and understand more about this part of your journey, Robin, because I feel like you've met a lot of people, and you've also mentioned 10,000 of startups just within, like, the tech crunch and the next web journey. But I want to understand, because you've been on this side of the table more often than that one, right? So, and I'm sure that you've talked to different people, which might have led to different learnings and also changed your perspective from one thing to another. So I just want to learn more about, has there been, like, and I'm sure there are many, but one specific profound experience that you've had that has had an impact on you personally or professionally?
I would say it's meeting young, driven people at a very young age, at the very start of their company, with just an idea.
Right.
And then 10 years later, or maybe 12 years or 15 years, they go through an acquisition or an IPO or a very successful exit, and everyone talks about them. But I always think, like, I remember that person when we were just like sitting, when there were 2 people in the team or maybe 3. And I didn't, like, for most of these early stage startups, we also have to be honest there as journalists. We see so many of them. We can't predict which ones are going to make it, right? But it's always the ones who are the most tenacious and the most just relentless and just don't give up, right? So that's a big learning for me, that you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You don't have to have the biggest idea or even the best tech.
Wow.
But if you start and you just keep on going, there's almost nothing that can stop you. It's very much not the competition that will kill you, right? It's either internal struggles, as I said earlier, not finding product market fit fast enough, not finding funding fast enough when you're in the worst environment like we are in now. Even with the best idea and the best people, it can go wrong, right? So if everything aligns and you're just focused and relentless in execution, there is so much upside for you. And I'm not talking only financially, but also means that you can create something that has an impact, whether it's economic or for society or sustainability. So that's a big learning for me. Like if you start something, don't give up easily, because good things can happen after a while.
I love that so much, because I feel like there's so many of us literally who run away, from the first sight of failure. Like, this is not for me, but it's more like, haven't even given it a shot properly. So
yeah. And it's a bit of a balancing act, because you can also argue that you can't stay on a bad idea too long. So you do have to sometimes say, stop, enough is enough, I'll go on to the next thing. But then if you find something that really fits, then go all the way, and don't give up. But it doesn't mean never give up, because at the end of the day, I think some founders were justifiably very embarrassed with their first company or their first product that they've built.
But I guess in that note, we can probably sum it up. It's not like never give up, but it's okay to let go at times.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. That emotional attachment that you have with your idea, just because.
Exactly that. Yeah.
Nice, awesome. But also, Robin, I would love to know, since you have worked a lot with the EU tech scene, you know about the upcoming trends, whether it's Web3, fintech, gaming, biotech, sustainability, all of it is amazing. And there's a lot of crazy, stuff that people are working on, which is amazing. So what are your biggest bets, if I can say that, or what is your say in the European tech scene that's emerging right now?
Yeah, those are really good questions. I think if you look back at the last 5 years, it's been mostly revolving around the fintech space, enterprise software. I think the next really big innovations and the big markets that are starting to be disrupted are healthcare. And healthcare is made up like a million elements, and one by one you can see those being addressed by startups. Education is a big one. Education technology, everything related to agriculture, and then primarily sustainability and energy are going through so many changes that at the 10 years from now we'll look back and say, like, this was a catalyst for this innovation or this movement or this project. So there's a lot happening there. Web3 I'm a little bit more skeptical about, simply because I've already seen so much of the hype cycles that it's very difficult to get me excited about new things, because they need to make sense for a large audience and not just the people who are in it. And right now with Web3 and this whole NFT and decentralization space, sometimes they cater to themselves as an audience, and they don't really. So I look at it very, very closely, but I'm a bit skeptical there. Yeah.
Right. Okay. But I would also want to know more about, like, since you've been a part of platforms where people come in to consume media, right? I want to know more about what sort of media do you consume? What platforms do you look at, and why and what for? So just to understand the mindset. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm a bit of a news junkie, so don't take my advice if you're not like me. But I have so many publications and people that I follow, and for me, the best tool to do that is honestly Twitter. I know it's a bit of a cliche for journalists. They say they use and love Twitter, but it's true. I have Twitter lists that I could not live without.
Right.
I could live without them, but I couldn't.
No, I get what you
mean.
Yeah.
I literally couldn't. I can't even imagine what my job would have to be like if I didn't have Twitter. So the Twitter lists help enormously. I think email newsletters are quite underrated, especially there's a number of people like doing individual newsletters or very small audiences, but very, very niche, very targeted, which I really love. So email newsletters works for me, and Twitter. Those are still the best sources of information for me. Yeah.
And would you have any advice because again, coming back to, the journey of starting off 9 years ago, the landscape was very different. The way we wrote content and consumed content was very different than where we are today. So what is your take on that in terms of, the different eras of content creation and also consumption? Because again, our attention spans have also gotten shorter. So,
yeah, that's true.
So where do, platforms like ours or even this come into play now?
Yeah, to be really honest, and this is sort of an admission from me, but we were also very late in sort of catching that wave of like the Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat. We still are to a degree because we cater to a business audience, so they're also behind. They're still on LinkedIn and like email newsletters. But we can see that the content consumption is shifting. We look at it very closely. If I would start today on my own to do any type of new publication, I probably focus my effort first and foremost on video, short form, platforms like TikTok. But I would also find a niche that is underserved. I don't think technology startups at this point are underserved. I think the way to go is really look at something like sustainability, climate change, what is being done in green tech and clean tech. There is an enormous amount of things happening there on the startup side, on the investment side. On the media side, I think there's still a bit of a gap. So that's an opportunity for a lot of the wannabe media entrepreneurs. That's a space that I would jump in today, because you could sort of see the growth curve. You can see the attention shifting to it as well for obvious reasons.
Because I feel like there's a lot of shift and a lot of attention towards creating your own media agency or an outlet where people want to now create more content than before. Because I feel like back then it was more of a far-fetched sort of only a certain group of people can become YouTubers. But now you have it's a very girl next door kind of vibe on TikTok, where everybody can create content and post and be.
It's funny that you say that, because that's what they were also saying 10, 12 years ago, right? Now YouTube exists, everyone can be a creator. Now social media, on Facebook, everybody can build an audience. On LinkedIn, you can have groups. And so they were already saying the same things that you're saying now, but just different names and different platforms.
True.
But of course, the audience is getting bigger. I mean, the number of creators per definition is bigger. The number of people who can consume that content are bigger. But that also means the competition is very, very harsh, right? So competing for attention is not going to stop getting more difficult every day. So I think it's a real challenge. Yeah.
Robin, there's one more question that I really want to address, and that's out of personal curiosity and interest. So when we talk about all these big platforms, whether it's TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, and all the bigger names that we have, there is a topic around, censorship in media, right? There's a lot of cancel this and cancel that, and, people are not really willing to, I guess, understand or even listen to a different perspective than their own. So, and again, I feel like that is very different from how it was back in the day, because I feel like there was sort of more tolerance in a sense, but now I feel like if it's not my opinion, then I'm not going to listen to it, and I'm not going to, make it feel heard or, getting that attention that it needs. Maybe it doesn't, but again, to each their own. So I really want to understand your opinion and your take on that, since you've been in the media industry for a very, very long time. So yeah, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I said this to someone just about a year ago. I got the question at sort of group conversation, like, what do you think the biggest problem is that the world faces today? And a lot of the answers were sort of around climate change, or like a disease like Corona really wiping us out. Mine was polarization, right? My answer is the fact that we don't seem to be able to meet each other halfway anymore, listen to each other. Try to understand other sides or other perspectives, and really take the time to sort of understand the big picture, I think is going to be a bigger problem for humanity than climate change in the short term, because you can already see the effect that it's having on the public discourse, on politics, on the way social media is being treated by regulators, but also by the audience, leaving Facebook or boycotting certain platforms. So there is a big shift underway. I have no pretense to know where we're going. I have no idea, but I do know that the direction that it's going in is a very, very bad one. This whole cancel culture, woke, this whole calling someone names just because they have a different opinion from you, not listening to one another. It's a huge problem, and this is something that I struggle with every day. When I see it, it just makes me angry, right? But there's little you can do about it, right? Because the platforms are held by a very few select big companies. Some of these companies have bigger balances than some governments, right? Have budgets. So so it's a huge issue that I don't see getting better in the short term at all. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. But I wish there was a little bit more attention given to the issue. Yeah, for sure. But I have no solution.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm hoping that, with media presences and, people talking more about it, it does get out there, because again, it started off with religion and then societal issues and then pressures. And then now it's again, different races and cultures, but then the differences getting pulled apart on a degree
absolutely
very massive at this, in this day and age, which is crazy. I see, for example, daily on TikTok as well, right? Imagine people, youngsters, teenagers, 20, people in their 20s getting, the same type of content again and again and again. And imagine people growing up and not even understanding what the other context is, or what the other side of the story is. So
Yeah,
It's
sometimes I'm really happy to sort of operate in a very small
Mhm.
niche of like tech
Yeah.
startups innovation, because there's also discourse there, but it
Mhm.
seems to be a bit more civil than all this discussion about the monarchy, for example, or
Yeah.
political parties or climate change. So I'm
True.
sort of sometimes happy to be in my little
Mhm.
corner of
Yeah.
innovation and just focus on that,
Yeah.
because it would get very depressing if I wasn't, I
Very
think.
true. Very true. But coming back to your journey, Robin, I would love to know your mindset shift from your 20s and where you are right now. I'm assuming obviously the goals were very different. You have a family now. And again, thank you so much because today you're giving me time, even though you have your younger boys that you're handling and taking care of. So how have your goals shifted over time?
Not a lot, to be honest. Like, I don't feel like I have different goals in my
Mhm.
now early 40s than I did in my 20s.
Right.
Although I have to say that I never sort of expected to be in media at all when I started my career in
Oh.
tech. Like, I didn't expect to be in media. I didn't expect to be involved with startups. I've also started investing a bit in startups here in Belgium lately, which is a whole different experience, of course. Um, but it's like I just want entrepreneurs to be able to do their thing and get recognized for it. And whether it means like talking to policymakers that barriers need to be removed, or setting up something like Decentral, which I did in Brussels, which provides like a place for social entrepreneurship, or through investing or through media. All I want to do is sort of elevate the entrepreneurs, because I think,
Okay.
I mean, they're the real change makers, right? Like,
Right.
I'm in Brussels, so I do talk to a lot of policymakers, way too many for my own good. And I don't think that change is going to come from there. I mean, you need them and they need us,
Yes.
but it's the entrepreneurs that
Exactly.
really, really will change the world. I really solidly believe that. And almost like in a utopian way, I think entrepreneurs are going to lead us through the difficulties that we're facing now
Mhm.
and the difficulties that we'll face in the future. I have no doubt about that.
Amazing. And I love the transition that you're also, that person now who is in a position to help those startups, help those people who are just starting out.
Exactly.
And I love
That's a really, I feel very grateful to be in that position now. I hope it only grows
Mhm.
over time in
Yep.
the next 20 years. But I do want to do my part in sort of enabling those entrepreneurs, because I've also learned that I'm not that entrepreneur. Like, I can't do what most of these people can. But I do want to be able to support them in any way that I
Okay.
can.
Awesome. But since we're also short on time, Robin, I would love to know your advice for people in their 20s, starting off, whether they want to get into, let's say, media and journalism, or whether they want to create something of their own, or whether they're just, trying to figure out what to do with their lives, which I feel like all of us are.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure it's not getting easier to be in your
Yeah.
20s. But it dials back to what I said earlier. If you find something that you love, and I know this sounds so cliche, but if
Yeah.
you find something that you love, eventually you'll be able to make money from it, either one way or another. But you have to not give up easily. You have to sort of be tenacious and really, strive for what you want, and not give up after a year or like 2 years, or first difficulty and you give up. That's something that I tend to see in younger people a bit more than I care for. Sort of this, everything has to be easy,
Yeah.
and you face one difficulty and you move on to the next one.
Mhm.
Also because it's getting easier, right? Like, the barriers are almost gone, right? So to
Yep.
start something new, to create a media company or to create content in general. But I do feel it's the one that really, push and really go for it in a long term.
Mhm.
They have so much more chance of being successful at it than those who start and then give up,
Mhm.
for obvious reasons. So I would say just find something that you love.
Awesome.
Try not to be too hung up when it fails. I mean, you can find something else that you love.
Mhm.
Like, I'm not of the belief that someone only has one passion in life. Sometimes there's several. Pursue
Right.
one. If it doesn't pan out, move to the next one. Also, your passions and the things you care about change over time,
Mhm.
right?
Very true.
So go with the flow. See what the market's like. See what your peers are doing, and just make a decision for yourself.
Awesome. Nice. Thank you so much. And one last question for the series. Since you've been again on the side of the table, interviewed so many people, and I also want to get to know more about, different people and their journeys, and more focus on, the challenges that they've overcome to become the people that they are today, and not just talk about, the wins. And I'm so glad we were able to do that with you as well. So if you can advise me on what sort of, like, if there's one question that I should ask my next guest, like, what would that be?
You're doing very well, first and foremost.
Thank
So I like your style of interviewing. I'll tell you something that someone
you.
once told me at a networking
Sure.
event. At a networking event, you meet someone, the first question you ask, like, who are you, where are you from, what do you do? Those questions are irrelevant. Ask what's home for you and why. Why do you do what you do? How did you get into this field? Are far more interesting questions than what are you currently trying to build? It's the why, right? Why are you doing this?
Thank you so much, Robin. I have loved this conversation so much. I feel like we've covered
Likewise.
a really wide spectrum of things, and I'm so glad that we were able to. And it's cool.